Good evening. Could I have your attention, everybody, please? Thank you. Right, before we start, I have to do some housekeeping announcements. Fire exits, if the fire alarm sounds, it won't be a practice, so exit as quickly as you can through basically the doors you came in through, or out through the doors you came in through. The meeting will be filmed for live internet broadcast and will be available for viewing later via the council website. Those using the public microphone will be filmed, and anybody behind them may inadvertently be filmed. If you've parked in the visitors' car park with the barrier, you'll need a code to lift the barrier, and that's on the door, on this side of the door as you go out. But hopefully you'll be in the one with the barriers already raised. So the code, as I said, is on the back of the door there. And to explain the setup, there are normally 12 councillors. We've got a couple of absences. Members sat round here, members of the committee. I'm the chair up here, and the other people up here with me are planning officers and admin officers to help with the running of the meeting, and someone from County Highways as well. So finally, could you turn off any mobile phones so we don't get into any interruptions during proceedings? And I'll move on straight onto the agenda. Apologies for absence. We have apologies for absence from Councillor Sue Reid, Councillor Jessica Tomlin and Councillor Dorcas Binns. Declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest? I believe we do. Yes.
I'd like to declare an interest in item 2, the land near the Horsetrough roundabout, and I will be leaving the chamber and absenting myself from that item.
Steve?
Likewise.
Okay.
That's easy. Oh, yeah.
Okay, first we have to approve minutes of 3 meetings, 26th of November, 18th December, 8th of January. No notification of any problems with those, so I assume, is everybody okay that I sign those as a correct record of the meetings? Yeah. I think we need to take a vote on that. Right, item 1, land northwest of Box Road, Cam. The approval of reserved matters, which has come back to us. Erection of 90 residential dwellings, including affordable housing, access-related works with public open spaces and associated works. And the case officer is Amy Robertson, who's going to present her report.
Thanks, Chair. Okay, evening, everyone. As Chair has just said, the application for the reserved matters of 90 residential units, public open space and landscaping. The principle of development for the residential use on the site and the provision of the overflow car park for the train station has already been established under the outline consent. We as planning officers are aware that there's been a lot of local objection to the scheme and to sort of a lot of the schemes along Box Road relating to car parking along Box Road in relation to the train station. However, this application is only seeking approval for the reserve matters, and so it's everything inside of that red line. The layout roughly follows the indicative layout plan provided under the outline application, with a few houses fronting onto Box Road to blend with the existing on the road and keep continuity with the recent approvals also along Box Road, namely the Bovis scheme that is currently being built out at the moment. Landscaping has been enhanced throughout the scheme, and we've had significant revisions come in. We've got the inclusion of a lot more street trees, which obviously break up the development and create a better sense of place. In terms of housing design, there is a mixture. We've got detached, semi-detached apartments and terraced properties on the scheme. The affordable housing is distributed within 4 main areas that sit within the allowed numbers as contained within our obligations supplementary planning guidance. After a meeting held between Stroud District Council Highways and the applicant, a parking strategy and parking management plan has been provided, which is satisfactory to the Highways Authority and to SDC. This shows the number of garages and integrated garages, as well as the location of the unallocated visitor car parking spaces. We don't have any technical consultees that have raised any issues. and therefore the application is recommended for approval at this committee. Thank you.
Right. This is when we normally have ward members speaking. I don't think we don't actually have a ward member here, but Councillor Jessica Tomlin, who's one of the ward members, has sent a piece that she'd like to have read out. Cherry's going to read that for you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is an email that Councillor Tomlin sent me knowing that she wouldn't be able to attend tonight's meeting. So she says she apologises for not being here. She said, I did not support the outline application on Box Road for 90 houses outside the settlement boundary, and in June last year I requested a call-in to DCC for reserve matters regarding this application. I feel that the multiple developments on Box Road have created individually different developments, each presenting additional issues to the overdeveloped area and the inadequate roads. The parking issues on Box Road for the train station are ongoing, and whilst there is some parking within the site, it will not be enough to address the problem. The road is not wide enough for large vehicles, including buses, to the train station, construction traffic, farm traffic, and traffic going to neighbouring villages. Whilst I do not support this permission, I acknowledge that the issues that were raised last summer, and that's at the time when Councillor Tomlin called it in, that's 6 months ago, relating to design and materials have been addressed by officers, and that Highways have reviewed some issues within the development. I therefore have no further comment to make on this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. I don't think there's anybody here from Cam Parish Council, is there? No. Anyone who wishes to speak in opposition? No. I understand we have someone who wishes to speak in favour of the application. If you could go to the public speaking microphone, but could you not touch the microphone or the buttons because we're having a little technical problem. We'll handle the on-off bit. And admin will switch on the mic when your time starts, and you'll have four minutes. So I'll just keep an eye on the clock. She will be cut off.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, Chair. Good evening, members. Very quickly, thank you for the opportunity to speak in relation to this Reserve Matters application, which has been the subject of lengthy pre-application discussions with officers and the Parish Council, as well as ongoing discussions, as you just heard, during the determination of the application. As the officer's report sets out, there is no objection to the application from the Parish Council, one objection from local residents, and the recommendation is to approve. As you've also just been advised, the comments made by the Highway Authority late in the process have now been discussed, and there is no objection to the application from any of the technical consultees. In terms of the Parish Council's comments that you'll note in the officer's report, where they support moving the approved car park onto the adjoining land, I can confirm that we have made the offer to that relevant landowner stroke promoter. They, however, are not in a current position to actually advance those talks, considering their options, I think is what they're doing currently. The offer will be kept on the table, however, until such time as we need to start constructing the car park to alleviate some of the problems along Box Road, based on the terms set out in the Section 106 agreement. In terms of other points, it's worth noting that the proposal provides access up to the boundary of the adjoining land to the west and southwest as requested by officers, which I'm not sure was part of the outline, but something we're willing to commit to. Members will also be aware that the means of access into the site has been approved under the outline planning permission, such that only the internal access arrangements are now due for consideration, and which the Highway Authority say are acceptable. The design of the house has been discussed with the Parish Council and officers, both of whom consider the design to be acceptable. We therefore consider that this Reserve Matters application dealing with the design of the scheme complies with planning policy and the practice guidance. As such, we hope that you will be in a position to support the officer's recommendation to approve. Thank you very much indeed.
Oh, okay. Sorry, are we still? Okay. Okay, thanks. Sorry, the clock. I was told there would be a clock, but apparently it didn't appear, so we'll be doing that with the old-fashioned way. Right, okay. Members have any questions for the planning officer?
Yeah, thank you. Maybe the weather today has made me think about this, but on page 27, and it may be that this isn't the time we talk about this, but the comments from the Gloucestershire Lead Flood Authority, they're not really clear. It seems that the proposal results in the drainage system that is far from ideal. So, and it then says, proposed solution that will work, the drainage calculations show that it will protect properties on the site without increasing. Therefore, so when will we actually be able to drill down on that? Because it does, that statement starts off by saying it isn't ideal, but then seems to say, well, it's okay. Can you give me some clarity?
Yeah, so initially when the application came in, we had, I mean, CAM is built on sort of clay soil, so there's clay underneath, so infiltration rates can't always be achieved along those sites. And one of the sites just to the north, which is actually subject of an outline application, they're really struggling with getting infiltration rates. So when the lead local flood authority have said that it's not ideal, it's because they sort of tabled the idea that all of the developers along Box Road would come together collectively and put a strategic pumping station in. And it was tabled. We did try and get them all to come in, but because of the stage of development that all the developments are at currently, it just wasn't possible. So whilst it is not the best solution would be that they would all work together and have one strategic pumping station for the whole lot. The pumping station that's proposed on this site is sufficient for that site. Thank you.
It may be illegal. Can't we require them to come in and sit down and because that does sound a far more sensible solution. I'm thinking about long term for the residents. If there's a better solution, which probably isn't going to cost them more, and surely it helps them to share the services like that. We can't tell them to do it.
We can't require them to do it now. We have got a lot of them round a table, and unfortunately, because some of the developments, the Milford site has already got its outline, and the Bovis H1 site has got its reserve matters approval. It is too late to require that. It would have had to have come, many years earlier. So at this stage, it's not possible, unfortunately.
Yes, Tom.
Two things. Can you tell me where they're pumping it to, firstly?
So I believe they're pumping it, I don't have a plan actually, so they're pumping it along the road and up in the direction of the train station, I believe. Up to the direction of the train station along the road and into the main sewers. Yeah, so that will be for stormwater runoff.
We end up with a flooded car park. Second question, are there any cycle routes through there?
So there's no specific cycle routes on the scheme, but there are 2-metre pavements, and to the rear of the scheme there's a walkway that comes past the play area and then around the Suds Pond and around the back through here. So whilst it's not specifically for cycling, it will be a bound material.
They're still quite narrow, aren't they? And I mean, are we making no progress whatsoever on making allowance for particularly electric bikes these days? We're here going to be carbon neutral in no time at all, and yet when it comes to something as basic as putting a cycle track through a new housing estate, we make no allowance for it. I mean, can we as a planning authority, or are we beholden to Gloucestershire Highways and their standards for pavements and cycle tracks?
If I may Sorry, Chair. I think it depends on the site and where that cycle route may go. And on this site, it's obviously adjacent to an existing established development. To the rear, if I can call it that, where it says pedestrian cut through to neighbouring development, but beyond that there's the railway line. So actually, on this particular site, I suppose the question would be where would a cycle route through it go, and therefore on this particular site I think the situation with regard to the footpaths and the cul-de-sac nature of a lot of the development was considered acceptable. Certainly on the allocated site within CAM, there certainly is a strong proposal there for having a cycle route because it actually makes sense and it's legible. So I think that might be why we don't have one here.
I mean, from a highway authority perspective, then we want to try and introduce strategic walking and cycling routes. That's part of our local transport plan that's under consultation at the moment. So that's a plug to read it and respond and make your statements on how you think we're going to achieve that in the future. But Jerry's broadly right here. I mean, the scale of development, it's a residential scheme, it's predominantly enclosed. To sacrifice areas to give 3-metre facilities where the carriageway is wide enough that it's not going to be dominated by cars. It's got parking provision which is all going to be on plot. We've encouraged a layout which should be pretty enjoyable to use, and so why would cycling not be part of that landscape? I mean, one of the changes we're looking to encourage is that understanding that the road is not just for cars, it's for everyone. Cycling is one of the factors that's going to have to propagate itself and be modally shifted, and once there are more cyclists than cars, then the road will be for them. It's a fact that people will need to get on their bikes and start riding, and we're looking to do that, but within a residential layout of this scale, there is safe and suitable amenity for everybody that wants to ride a bike.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Miranda.
Right. Starting off with sustainability, are we still not able to require solar panels and charging points and things like that on our buildings?
So under the outline, all before the dwellings are occupied, there will have to be electronic charging points. So that has already been agreed under the outline. In terms of solar panels, we don't have any on this development, no.
So if I may, coming back to cars, the 40 car parking spaces for the station, how are they separated from the rest of the development? I see there's a picture of 4 little trees. Is there some adequate sort of sound barrier between the car park and the neighbouring residences?
So we've, when the application initially came in, there wasn't much landscaping, and the closest residential development to the car park was in a slightly different arrangement. So we changed the orientation of it, and we got the applicants and developers to put in hedges and some trees, just to landscaping and to screen it as much as possible. And it's set at a greater distance than what was previously proposed.
And can you remind me how many parking spaces per dwelling are there across the site, not counting the station parking?
So on the residential units, not including the apartments, there are 2 per dwelling, plus visitor spaces.
And for is that for all of them, or what about the flats?
Bear with me 1 second. So I don't have a plan that says it specifically, but it will be a minimum of one. There won't be any less than one for the flats.
And you mentioned charging points. Do we know how many charging points?
It's on the outline application for all, as far as I'm aware, all will relate to all of the dwellings. So it will be prior to the occupation of all of the dwellings.
Jenny?
Do we think that it is adequate parking for the overflow from the train station to avoid, if it gets full up, people taking the visitors' car parking because they can't find any other car parking?
Okay. As it stands at the moment, there are roughly, on any given day, based on whether the parish is telling me or the local councillors are telling me, or if our own officers go out and have a look at Box Road, about 40 cars parked on the street. And we're providing 43, as proposed on that layout, 42, sorry, for the car park. So the balancing act works mathematically. We are extremely mindful that what that actually does is creates 42 new parking spaces as and when they present themselves, and why would you park there and not on Box Road? That's one of the reasons why we have been incorporating the parking management plans as a condition on each of these sites, because they're going to have to figure out how they respond to that issue. Yeah, they're going to build new roads, and new roads are going to be of interest to people that like to commute to train stations. So by having a car park management plan condition, this development in isolation will sort itself out. And however it has to respond to it whilst it's private property, we will secure, by making it public, the same provisions. That means that if we have to install TROs because they put parking enforcement in place, we're going to do that. So in isolation, each of these developments will now resolve the parking problem. So as we move forward one by one, we're going to start resolving the parking problems on Box Road. What we're going to do as a highway authority in the meantime is keep looking at Box Road and working out what we need to do with it, because it's our current highway. And if we need to put measures on that to keep people from parking on there and encourage them into these spaces, that's how we're going to move forward with it. But until these things are built and until they start to become used, we cannot anticipate exactly what those behaviours are going to be. So we're on a watching brief with this until we understand what the behaviour is going to be like of the people commuting to the train station.
Thank you, Chris. Any more questions?
So that all sounds well and good, but I think many of us have seen what happens afterwards, that trying to revisit some of these topics isn't easy because the land has been allocated, people are getting into habits. I mean, is that car park, what I'm unclear about, is it for exclusive use of the residents, the one we're talking about, or can we actually make it exclusive use that we can't allow? I mean, how do you stop the visitors and things like that? Sorry, that's where I get confused. I mean, certainly in my area, when the way Barrett's replaced the on-street parking was to put some parking and give the residents keys to like their own little parking spot, and that sort of relieved the pressure. So you'd have to park off-road on one of the spots you were given, and that then got rid of some of the pressure for the off-road. I mean, is that the sort of thing you're going to talk about doing, or?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, currently we're not talking about doing anything because it's a private management solution. It's for the applicant to manage privately with the planning condition. So what the parking management strategy will have in it, the plan, is an element in it which says that as and when you move forward and promote this road for adoption, should you ever, you're going to have to make sure that we can marry our highways powers to whatever you've been doing to make this work. So if it turns out that they have told people that these are parking areas for general use and these are parking areas that only residents can use, and whatever works for those residents whilst they're privately managing it, we would scrutinise that, take that planning condition, that document at the adoption stage, and make it work under our powers. So we're fairly happy with the approach that we're taking because it's a good tried and tested way of making sure that that gap that you're concerned about what happens when it becomes someone else's responsibility isn't missed, and that they know that they have a financial responsibility to make it work in highways terms as well. In terms of the car park at the front itself, the intention is that it is intended as a public car park. It wouldn't be designed for the residents of this scheme. We haven't gone through the Section 106 and that promotion of it, but when that comes forward, we would work with the planning officers here to make sure that it was a public car park that was enforced like a public car park should be. That would mean that it may be that people, if residents accidentally park there, they might find themselves with a penalty charge notice because it's not for them. Yeah, I mean, we haven't gone through that process yet, because once it's built and we understand what its need is, we would only seek to administer controls which were appropriate to make sure that it was suitable for its purposes. That's very similar to the canal side project that you guys were looking at, I think 6 months ago, where you had that car park opposite the pub, and you were concerned about how that would operate, and we said there's a car park management plan on that. It's exactly the same principle. We'll concern ourselves about the enforcement when it becomes an enforcement matter.
Right, any more questions?
Parking again, I'm afraid. The agent mentioned the offer to work with the promoters of the site north of it. Can you tell us what the hope of that deal would be? I'm not sure. Have you been involved in that, Amy?
I haven't been involved in it, to be honest, but I know from a planning perspective, obviously, myself as officer, you know, I get daily phone calls about Box Road and cars parking on it. I'm dealing with the outline application in between this site and the railway station, and we have put to them that we'd be looking for the same ratio percentage for dwellings to car parking spaces on that site too. But in terms of land swaps for the car park into that next site, no, I've not had any dealings with that. It wouldn't be for us to deal with.
Okay, no more questions. Officer advice is to approve. Would anybody like to put that as a motion? Shall I propose it from the chair? Miranda, are you proposing? Seconder? Nigel? Okay, so we've got a motion on the table. Anybody want to debate? Miranda.
Being a Cam Parish Councillor, though not this ward, this whole area has been a bone of contention for a long time, and it just shows the difficulties of piecemeal development. None of this land on this side of Box Road was intended to be developed. It was all outside the settlement area. A piece of land at the top of the road was granted planning on appeal, and subsequently we got development all the way down the road on that side, which is why we've got all these separate bits of development that haven't got a strategic plan. And the thing about the drainage is quite worrying, because the next field down, which we saw on sites, was just huge muddy puddle. So I'm not quite sure how the drainage is going to be solved, but I guess that's down to the developers. And given the weather situation at the moment, you sincerely hope that they do get the drainage problem properly sorted out. Yeah, I've been down Box Road lots of times and counted the cars as I go down, and it's usually 37 cars parked, so I'm thinking that for the moment that number of car parking spaces for the station will be adequate. Looking at the plan, I'm disappointed again that the affordable housing is overlooking the car park. Seems kind of not fair, but am I surprised? Also, it's a shame that the play area is stuck on the side of the site and not in the middle, where it would be maybe more readily used. But I guess that's where it's being planned to go. So I don't think it's not a reason for refusing permission. But you know, the whole situation down there is really difficult, and nobody really likes what's happening very much, but I think the officers have worked as hard as they can at improving what was there, and just hope that the last bit of development there will help equally solve some of the parking problems. So that's why I'm voting for this.
Anybody else? No? In which case we go to the vote. It's 3 for yes, 3 to approve, 3 for no, and 4 to abstain. Sorry, what did I say? Sorry. Okay. 2 for yes to approve, 3 for no, 4 to abstain. Right, so that's clearly carried, and that is approved. So, item number 2. Oh, right, okay, sorry, a couple of members have to absent themselves first. Okay, item 2, land near Horsetrough Roundabout, Ebley Road, Stonehouse. Erection of auction showroom along with associated parking and landscaping. And I understand also now the case officer, well, the officer will be explaining about, we're also adding in the proposed moorings. The case officer, John Chaplin, isn't able to be here to present his report due to illness, so Amy Robertson is going to be handling this one again. She's obviously not as familiar with the case as John would have been, so if you can bear that in mind. I think there's an email went out explaining that if anybody missed it. So Amy's standing in. I think there are some late papers on the drainage. Anyway, Amy's going to present the report.
Thanks, Chair. Okay, so if I start with late pages first then, so since the agenda was sent out for this item, we had 3 reasons for approval. The third reason for approval... Refusal. Did I say approval? Sorry, for refusal was a drainage-related condition. Since then, John Chaplin, or STC, we've had confirmation from county that they have sufficient evidence at this point in time that they'd be able to condition the requirements for the drainage, so we're proposing to scrap that reason for refusal. So the application is for full planning permission for proposed new auction facility with associated parking and landscaping, and as Chair's just said, we will have to amend that description to include the provision of moorings. The application site lies external of a defined settlement development boundaries and is therefore in open countryside in policy terms. The site is currently agricultural with no previous use and lies entirely within the Industrial Heritage Conservation Area, and some parts of the development site lie within Flood Zone 2. As just said, there are now 2 reasons recommended for a refusal. The first being its location outside of the settlement boundaries, and the second due to the location and scale of the proposal and the impact that the development will have on the IHCA. I think it's important to stress here that the refusal reasons are policy-based, and the UK obviously complies with a plan-led system, and this is shared within the National Planning Policy Framework under paragraph 11 and paragraph 47 that states planning law requires the applications for planning permission be determined in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. The concept of settlement limits is at the heart of Stroud District Council's local plan under policy CP3 and CP15, and there is an assumption that development outside of these boundaries is not acceptable unless the proposal meets a series of strict criteria and exceptions. In this case, it's not considered by the planning authority that this application does so. The location of the site within the IHCA is probably the most notable recommended reason for refusal. The IHCA is characterised by different character areas, with this site sitting within the Green Corridor Rural Frome Vale. The open and undeveloped nature of the site is therefore a key element of the site that adds to its historic importance within the IHCA. We've had several recent applications refused under delegated powers and then dismissed at appeal for residential development to the east of the site. I believe they're all on the same site. This site is much smaller than the application site put forward this evening. However, the Planning Inspectorate consistently stated that the harm that would result to the IHCA if the developments were to be allowed would be unacceptable. The proposal itself is putting forward a two-storey building with parking and landscaping and some moorings, and some mature trees and hedgerows are to be removed in order to accommodate the development. The proposed development site plan shows the provisions of moorings within the red line, and therefore we will again alter the description of development to reflect this. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Karen, sorry.
Can I just...
Yeah.
Obviously, because Amy's filled in at very short notice, if I may ask her to just run through the plans with you, because obviously she didn't have an opportunity to do that at the same time as presenting. And also we have Kate Russell here, who obviously is providing expert specialist advice in respect of the impact of the development on the conservation area. So if I may ask that if Amy can just run through the plans and explain what's proposed, and then if Kate can also just add to the presentation just from a conservation point of view, I'd be most grateful. Thank you.
Thanks, Joey. Okay, so obviously red line is our site location boundary. We are obviously due south of the main road and east or southeast of the Horse Trough roundabout. So this is our proposed site layout. There is an existing site access. Let's try and get this working. So there's an existing site access which is proposed to be improved to gain access onto the site. The building itself will be in this location here, and we've got parking split to the north of the site, and then in this a more formal parking arrangement to the east. The moorings are obviously along the Stroudwater Canal here. I've got a plan later on in this that shows some of the vegetation to be removed. So obviously the red hashed area is our conservation area, and you can see clearly that the site is 100% within our IHCA. The two grey lines that you see sort of on the east and west of the screen and the map denotes our settlement development boundaries, and the red is obviously our application site. So you can see clearly that the application site sits within open countryside. I've put on this map here with relation to the three appeals that I spoke about earlier. They're all on the same site, just north of that Ryford indicated by the stars. They were for residential developments, sort of 5, 4 and 2 residential developments, and I've just selected sort of summarising statements that the Planning Inspectorate wrote at the time under their reports. They're all dismissed on the same thing, basically the impact that those development would have on the industrial heritage conservation area. I've just selected parts of our policies here, so CP11 and CP15, and then our more heritage-led policies, and the purple one is obviously our national policy in regards to listed buildings and conservation areas. Images of the sites, unfortunately, they're not my images, and these are images from Google Maps, unfortunately. And this is a plan that I've taken from the tree and vegetation report. So the red is obviously indicative of the trees and vegetation that will be removed in order to accommodate the site. I think that's the last. I don't know if Kate wants to add anything on the conservation area things.
Just to put it a bit in context, this is one of the very few sites that actually constitute the rural Froome Vale character part. We've been here with the IHCA before in terms of those little green spaces that actually punctuate the built form. The rural Froome Vale It's generally quite an expansive character part. So if you think from Whitminster up through to Junction 13, for example, those vast expanses of water meadows, those are rural Froome Vale, but there are some tiny bits of remnants of it. So these undeveloped water meadows that actually do occur, we're losing them actually. So all that's left on the off side of the canal, so the side of the canal that isn't the towpath side, is the land opposite Avenue Terrace at Stonehouse, then this site, and then the site where Amy's cited earlier, their previously dismissed appeals. So on the off side of the canal, we've now got 1, 2, 3 bits of this last vestige of flood meadow left within this part of the conservation area. So it really is a finite resource now, one that we are keen to protect.
Right. Ward members. Rachel, I understand you want to speak as Keynes Cross Parish Councillor. Sorry, Keynes Cross Ward Councillor.
Thank you.
You don't have a time limit, so...
Okay, I won't take too long, I promise. Thank you. So as you say, I'm here as the local ward councillor for Keynes Cross to speak in support of this application. But in many ways, I'm here to represent my Stonehouse colleagues, because as you can see, the site falls literally metres into the Keynes Cross ward. And as you've seen from the papers, the application is very much supported by the Stonehouse community. Indeed, I think there have been 154 expressions of support submitted from the local community as well as Stonehouse Town Council. And as I understand it, the applicants have worked hard to answer previous concerns regarding conservation, wildlife and drainage. So I wanted to talk about economic benefits, social benefit, and then the objections that have been raised in relation to the site. In relation to economic benefits, the business at its current site currently has a turnover of £3 million per annum. But growth has slowed due to the restrictions at their current location, where there are no further opportunities for expansion. And the business plan for this site projects an £8 million turnover by year 5. The business currently employs 9 full-time staff and over 20 part-time staff, and they estimate that at least 5 more full-time staff and 8 or 9 more part-time staff over the 5 years will be employed over the 5 years of that business plan. Really importantly, I think we should consider that the business brings in hundreds of visitors to the district every month from all over the country, from outside of the district. And so customers coming to this business are likely to stay and use the canal facilities. They're likely to use local businesses in Stonehouse Town Centre, as well as restaurants and hotels across the district, and may well come back once they've seen our wonderful district. So that's what I want to say in relation to economic benefits. In relation to social benefits, it's been mentioned that the applicant intends to create a slipway and moorings for the canal company and to create visitor mooring to provide access to the canal at this point. I mean, although I'm a very big fan of the canal development, one of my concerns, and I think others share it, is that access has been limited. This would be one of the very few sites offering connectivity and access to the canal. The site will also create 4 car parking spaces and electric car charging facilities next to the road and outside the boundary of the gates. And the business have said that they'll provide funding for the local charity Boat Mobility to improve their facilities. So just turning to the objections in relation to the application. I mean, first of all, in terms of the location and scale and talking about eroding the green gap. I mean, I understand that, but I think when you drive along Westwood Road from Stonehouse to Keynes Cross, where I live, that green gap was eroded a very long time ago. There's massive development at Foxes Field. Wycliffe School has developed along either side of that road. This is a very small area, boundaried by 2 very busy roads. And then, in relation to the objection to the site being located outside of the settlement limit, well, it is literally just outside of the settlement boundary. And I'd ask the committee to consider paragraphs 83 and 84 of the National Planning Policy Framework, updated in 2018, in reference to supporting a prosperous rural economy. Paragraph 83 refers to decisions which should enable, planning policies and decisions which should enable sustainable growth and expansion of all types of businesses in rural areas, both through the conversion of existing buildings and well-designed new buildings. And this is in relation to supporting a prosperous rural economy. And then in particular, I'd highlight paragraph 84, which states, planning policies and decisions should recognise that sites to meet local business and community needs in rural area may have to be found adjacent to or beyond existing settlements. And so for those reasons, I'd ask you to consider supporting this application this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. I believe we have a representative from from Stonehouse Town Council, Councillor Neil Gibbs. Are you ready?
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. You have 4 minutes. I'll give you a warning when you're getting to the last 30 seconds.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'd just like to take issue with the officer's comments that this site is on a flood meadow. It is not a flood meadow, never has been a flood meadow, and probably never will be a flood meadow, so we just clarify that. Stonehouse Town Council are in support of this application, and we believe it fits well with most of the strategic objectives of the local plan. The proposed development will enhance the local economy and provide jobs, as well as encouraging visitors to the auction site and the nearby town centre. And we believe the development will enhance the canal side. The nature of the applicant's business means that a considerable proportion of the turnover is returned to local people in selling items at auction. We note that the application has considerable support from local Stonehouse businesses. The site is located close to Stonehouse town centre, providing a potential link which will encourage visitors to use our town centre facilities. The site is close to good public transport links, including a major cycle route, the canal, the M5 motorway, bus routes and Stonehouse railway station. The design makes attempts to minimise its carbon footprint by including PV panels and the provision of electric car charging points, and the buildings are designed to blend into the landscape, having a low roof line, and the design does not dominate the landscape. The smaller scale business use fits well with the original ethos of the canal as a place of work, and would therefore not be detrimental in our view to the rural and industrial character of the site. And the applicant has worked closely with Stroud Valleys Canal Company and Boat Mobility Charity, and will contribute towards the restoration and improvement works of the canal. It fits in, we believe, with the aim of ensuring that the Cotswolds Canal restoration plays a positive role in the district local plan. The development would also improve physical accessibility between the canal and the town centre, which is one of the guiding principles for development in the Stonehouse cluster. Regarding employment development, the proposal appears to be of a type and scale that does not harm the character, appearance or environment of the site or its surroundings, or to the amenities of any occupiers of nearby properties. It's readily accessible by public transport, bicycle and foot. It has a layout, access, parking, landscaping and facilities that are appropriate to the site and its surroundings. The applicants have tried without success to find a suitable alternative site in the district, and have given a positive nature of the application. And given the positive nature of this application, Stonehouse Town Council is strongly of the opinion that this application, if granted, would contribute enormously to our local economy, with minimal impact on the environment, which is historically a place of work and industry. The Town Council therefore commend this application to you, and we support it fully. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody wish to speak in opposition to the application? I haven't had anyone notify us that they want to, so I'm assuming there isn't, in which case I think we have two We have James White, Chair of Cotswold Canals Trust, who's going to do a very short, 45 seconds, I'm told, and then the applicant. Okay.
Good evening, Jim White, Chair and Engineering Director for Cotswold Canal Trust. Thank you for allowing me to speak. The proposed development is adjacent to the offside bank of the restored canal. That is the restored bit. We've done that bit already. Our trust is currently in the final grant application stage to open the canal from Stroud through to Sewell Junction by 2023-24. As witnessed by the current construction work, if I can call it that, restoring the canal through the middle of the A38 from Frimbridge roundabout and causing a lot of disruption at the moment, which I apologise for. This proposal provides essential mooring, allocation, car parking and connectivity to the canal for the benefit of Stonehouse and the surrounding district. It's wider than Stonehouse. Cotswold Canal Trust strongly supports this application and will work with Stroud Auctions to develop the facilities and connectivity to the canal and all the attendant benefits for the health and well-being that this development offers. Thank you.
Okay, I had 3 minutes left for the applicant. I'll give you a warning when you've got 30 seconds left.
Nick Bowkett, part owner and director of Stroud Auctions, and thank you for allowing me to speak. Since buying Stroud Auctions, my wife and I have been constantly searching for new premises. We've looked at every likely site in and around Stroud, but have found nothing. One of the planning officers involved, when we applied to use our previous building as an auction, even suggested that we use local village halls. This shows a real lack of understanding of our business. We turn over in excess of 3 million, and the business is classed as sui generis and doesn't have a place in the local plan. We're not seeking anything controversial or anything which is not permitted in national planning guidance, which was updated in 2018. Paragraph 84, which has already been mentioned, says that physically well-related developments next to existing settlements should be encouraged where suitable opportunities exist. The previous statement applies even more when there is significant economic and social benefit. We believe that we've shown that this is the case. Social benefits include agreements with the Canal Company, Cotswold Boat Mobility, public car parking and car charging, visitor moorings and canal access for Stonehouse. Economic benefits are huge and I think have been overlooked. At £6 million a year given back to customers, which are nearly always local, is the equivalent to 240 £25,000 a year jobs, which is hard to believe, isn't it? The pamphlet I have here, that was delivered to all households in the Stroud district, suggests that you want a greener, more sustainable economy. Can you think of a greener business than ours? You say you want to be carbon neutral by 2030. It says on the back, give everything a second chance. This is exactly what we do every day of the week, and we'd like to do more. There will certainly be long-term heavy industrialisation of the other part of the proposed site by the Canal Company for silt removal, plus a boatyard and quay. So citing the peace and tranquility of the canal corridor cannot be a valid reason to oppose this application. There will be regular movements of 40-ton lorries only 100 metres from the proposed sail room. We can guarantee that there will be more wildlife on the site after the proposed development than can be found there now. Indeed, the site has been used for industrial purposes relatively recently by Network Rail and Gloucestershire Highways, therefore destroying any wildlife that existed. The owners of the land are keenly supportive of our application because as public-spirited Stroud residents, they believe that we will continue to bring benefit to the area, and particularly Stonehouse. They are constantly approached by developers.
So you've got 30 seconds left.
We obtained a huge numbers of... my wife and I are not developers. We're sole owners of a business which needs a stable base. We've got a young team of auctioneers and valuers that we are desperately keen to retain, and this would allow us to do this. Please help us to keep the Stroud in Stroud Auctions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right. Members have questions for officers?
Yes, Chair. I feel I'm coming down memory lane on this, on the actual fact of the heritage conservation area, because that was put in 32 years ago, which actually, would you not agree that this is the industrial heritage conservation has actually saved that area from actually being used in just the businesses or business along? Would you not agree with me, Kate, that that is the case, that it was done in actual fact to actually protect the buildings in that area, and not much more on that?
I would agree that appeals have been...
Sorry.
I would agree that appeals have been dismissed on development of open land along there on the grounds of the harm to the conservation area. So yes, you're right, Councillor, it has protected it, the open spaces along that way.
I was reading this and I was quite concerned actually that the building was actually going to be lower than the floodplain. Is that correct, or have I got it wrong?
Yeah. I was just going to say that certainly yes, it is showed. I don't know whether we've got those elevations. Sorry. So it is showed lowered into the site, but I would refer members to the late pages, which obviously gives the views of the lead flood authority, and they don't have an issue with it. So on the basis that they are the experts in that area, it must be acceptable.
Just following on from that, John, I wonder whether perhaps I should invite Kate to talk to us about the heritage assets that are, those are material considerations in the report, aren't they?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Well, the Industrial Heritage Conservation Area, members, we've all been here before and we know that it's one of the most complex conservation areas in the country, more than likely. It's incredibly finely grained. Its character depends on where you're going, where you're coming from, where you're looking at. We've got, when we looked at this in 2003, we identified 19 separate character parts along the length of this, and that's actually simplifying it. It's actually even more complicated than that. So the canal itself, the Stroud Water Navigation, is an undesignated heritage asset within a designated heritage asset, which is the Industrial Heritage Conservation Area. The Industrial Heritage Conservation Area was originally started off as a sort of, it was known as the string of pearls. It was a string of mill sites that weren't actually related to each other. And then it was decided actually Stroud is so much more in industrial heritage terms than just a string of mill sites. So that's why they were all joined together to create the juggernaut that we've got now. But the open spaces were inevitably picked up as part of that, as the important part of that industrial story, as part of this history that we've got of industrial development in the Stroud Valleys. So from the mills going from river related to canal related to road related, this finely kind of balanced settlement that has been that has developed over the centuries since Doomsday. So what we're left with now is the remnants in some cases that are really, really important in maintaining that story. So whereby sometimes it's very clear, you've got, say, Fronebridge Mill in the landscape, and then you've got Chipman's Platt, and you can just go doof, doof, doof. But in other cases along the IHCA, because of incremental development, it's these little bits, they're so precious in understanding it. So in this particular case, its most important aspect is going along the canal towpath. So it's that sudden sort of rule, and I appreciate what's been said about it's being currently used as a depot and everything else, but it's still, if you go along the towpath, there's still that overwhelming sense of rurality. You can stand on the bridge at Ryford, which is one of the key hubs in the conservation area. It's a hub, the hub character type was identified as just encapsulating all the little facets that actually make the conservation area. So Ryford is one of those key hubs. And you can stand on the bridge at Ryford and look across the landscape out towards the Severn, and you see it in its rural context, and then you've got Stanley Mill. So it's really, really clear in its legibility. In terms of the other heritage assets, and we've got Ryford itself, so we've got Tankard House, Ryford Bridge, and the coal pen, the Stanley Mill coal pens on the towpath side. All of those are Grade 2 listed buildings. They're a really lovely cluster, old pubs, old mill owners' houses, all the rest of it. So actually it's a really telling cluster of this really very historic crossing point. And part of the significance of those buildings is their place in their setting. And their setting is very much, coming from the west, is very much that kind of rural tranquility that you get. As I said previously, this particular character part is increasingly rare. Since we actually made up those maps, we've lost, it's gone to the site with Sartorius and all those places by Bonds Mill. So we lost one of those fields since we did the conservation area. This cumulative harm has to be borne in mind. The Industrial Heritage Conservation Area is at risk on the Historic England's at-risk register because of cumulative harm, this death by 1,000 cuts. So that's why little sites like this, even though they might be relatively small, are actually very important in terms of the character of the conservation area and the setting of these really significant groups of listed buildings.
Thank you. I think that was useful. Yes, John. Sorry, John.
I mean, I always think it's wonderful we have sites panels. I really do, because what it made me realise, just a view, I don't know other people's view, that this whole area will
sorry,
actually
John,
be
we're
more...
doing questions.
Well, that was a question. Would you agree? The urbanisation of that area, would you not agree with me that? You know, within, you know, a touch nearly to Stonehouse as anything, and it could actually go further even. Don't you agree?
I do agree, and that's why we seek to protect these sites. If you're walking along the towpath from west to east, then gradually these sites that were open have just become so much rarer. So it's going to get to the point soon where you will come from just after Ryford double locks, let's say, so not far beyond this site. And we're getting to the point where we're going to be urbanising the canal all the way along to, what, Bowbridge, probably? Then there won't be a chance for boaters or users of the towpath to walk through something that has actually got that last impression of rurality. They are precious sites, Councillor, right?
Mm-hmm.
Any more questions for officers? Aidan.
Thanks. I note that the drainage issues have been resolved, but it does say on page 45 that the applicant has proposed to sink the building below existing ground level. And bearing in mind that the landscape and the setting is really important on this, have you got any illustratives that would demonstrate where the roof line would appear in relation to the, what I think is noted as fairly poor hedgerow that surrounds it at the moment?
Sorry, have I got mine as well?
So I don't have anything on screen because unfortunately our iDocs went down before this, but we do have some plans that we can pass around that just show some sections, yeah. Do you want the colour ones, yeah. There you go, these ones.
Thanks, Chair. Whilst they're looking at those, I know it says in the report somewhere about the boundary treatments and how that changed during the application process. What's the difference between the original one and the application now in terms of preservation of the trees and what have you?
If I'm honest, I don't know what has changed since the original. Do you mean the one that was refused under delegation?
It does mention the boundary treatments in here somewhere, and I think officers had worked with the applicant to ensure protection of more of the trees. So I wonder, how has that evolved? Where did it start from, and what were they looking at taking out originally? And I can see what's going to be.
Chair, through you, I do apologise, but as mentioned earlier, the case officer who would be able to answer that question isn't here, so it's not within Amy's sort of knowledge of remit to be able to answer that. Apologies.
Yeah, I think it's clear that the previous application there was more tree removal and now there's more tree retention, but the exact details John will probably be able to answer, but unfortunately he's not here.
And I think if I could just say that our Senior Biodiversity Officer has obviously looked at the application, and our arboricultural officers. Neither of those have given any objection to the scheme. So subject to management plans and landscape environmental management plans and things. So from their perspective, they are happy with what is being removed.
Thanks, Chair. Just the green gap, which Kate has mentioned and is mentioned in the report as being so important, and I think there was something that talked about the way the car park treatment has been addressed. Can you elaborate on that? What has been done to try and make sure the car park retained elements of this green gap?
I think, Councillor, and again, I'm afraid I'm not John, but looking at the landscaping scheme, I think they've tried to sort of do an orchard planting, and again, I'm not John, so I'm not terribly sure. We've raised it in our report that even though that is orchard planting, that actually is not what would maintain the character of this particular part of the conservation area. So I'm not entirely sure what was there before, and I'm sorry we're not able to answer your questions fully. But in car parking terms, from my point of view, in terms of the urbanisation of the conservation area, the planting I'm seeing before me would not be sufficient for me to be confident that it's got anything of the informality, the rurality, anything of the species, or the surfacing that would in some way soften or mitigate any impact. So sorry not to be able to answer you more fully, Councillor.
If I can just sort of chip in at that point, I think if I go back to the previous appeals on the site, where it's not on the site, but it's obviously on a much smaller site, just further east, the smallest of those applications were for 2 dwellings. I wouldn't imagine 2 dwellings would have anywhere near a bigger impact of a 70 parking area, and the inspectors ruled that the impact that those 2 dwellings would have on that green open area would have an impact and would cause harm on the IHCA. So I would only assume that the impact that 70 plus the auction house would be a far greater impact on that IHCA.
So I'm just going to go to Miranda. Yep.
The applicant mentioned making the building fit in with a rural sort of surroundings. Could you comment on the appearance of the building in terms of the heritage that you're trying to retain?
In some places, Councillor, to take the cue from an agricultural building would be appropriate in the Frome rural character part. However, in this particular case, it's felt that the site itself would not warrant an agricultural building of the size and scale that is proposed. So whilst it would be appropriate perhaps in a more expansive site, in this particular case it's disproportionate to the plot of land it's sitting in. So the important thing with the conservation area is for it to make sense, if new development in a conservation area, for it to make sense, but there wouldn't be any sense in an agricultural building in this particular context. So even though it's a very rural part of the conservation area, it's not sufficiently rural as to warrant a large barn.
So is it the size of the building or the design, the style of the building that is principal?
It's the principle that's the problem, but in terms of the building itself, then yes, it will be the scale and the design. I mean, in terms of looking across, albeit it's sunk, then you're still going to see quite a strong roofscape. So quite an atypical feature within the conservation area. So horses for courses, it's this very fine grain of conservation area, councillor. What might be okay in some places isn't okay in others. And
John.
This is to Jerry, really. This land hasn't been allocated in the local plan, has it?
No.
No. And so, I mean, what I think, would you agree that if this goes through, it's much easier for other places where they're not allocated? Would you agree with me on that?
I think it's fair to say that as officers that is a concern of ours. If permission is granted on this site without a significant and overwhelming justification why we should move away from adopted policy, then it does weaken our position in respect of other sites along this length, should they be subject of applications for development.
Okay.
Any more questions? Hayden? Can you make sure? John?
Thanks, Chair. On page 56, it says, whilst the agricultural design approach is noted, the size and scale of the building, along with the parking, would not relate to this rural setting and is unlikely to be effectively softened by the retention of a few trees and poorly maintained hedgerow vegetation and the limited proposed landscaping. Does that mean that if there was better hedgerow planting and some revised landscaping, that impact could be mitigated and might address some of the concerns that are being expressed?
If a development is only acceptable because you can't see it because of the plant screening, if that's the only thing that makes development acceptable, then one has to question whether that development is acceptable. I personally don't trust screening in order to mitigate harm, especially not these days with planting, various diseases and everything else coming, and we can't guarantee that screening will last forever. And in this particular instance, councillor, I mean, I'm no tree expert, but the naturalistic tree planting here would be deciduous, I assume, and hedgerow that is not evergreen as well. So it's only ever going to be sporadically shielded at any given point. So even with so if you were trying to have a naturalistic planting scheme, then it wouldn't fulfil that function of disguising development that isn't appropriate at all times of the year, in my opinion.
Sorry, Chair. Thank you for your indulgence. Can you give me an idea? I mean, obviously you've got the Ebley bypass that just goes at a high level by the proposed building tucked underneath the embankment there, proposed to be. How far away are the other important assets in the IHCA that, Kate, you mentioned it's important these green gaps to be part of their setting? How far away are the next nearest ones in metres? Or old-fashioned imperial if you want.
Well, no, that's not the best map. We'll go for a little in our minds a walk along the towpath, councillor, if that's all right. So, if we were wandering from west to east, then we'd get to Stonehouse Court. Now that's a green gap, it's not the Royal Froome green gap. Then we would wander along a bit further, and then we get into our old friend, the Ship Inn site. Again, not a Rural Froome Vale green gap. And then we would get into that just after the Skew Bridge for the Old Midland Railway. We would get into the patch that's the Whitcliffe Sports Hall site. I think there's still an extant scheme. It's where the Midland Railway used to go off. So it's that corner on the opposite side of the Horse Trough roundabout. And then we come to the Horse Trough roundabout site. And then if we go a bit...
Can I...
Yeah,
Kate,
sorry.
just as you're wandering along there...
I'm wandering along.
Isn't there, as you go past that skewed bridge, isn't there then quite a green gap in terms of woodland and or scrubby alder carr or something like that?
If you're wandering along towards the east and it's on your right-hand side, that would be the Whitcliffe land, which many years ago, when we were all young, I think permission was granted for a sports hall there, I think. And I think the permission was implemented, so I think it's extant. Without Darryl Rogers being here, then I can't remember for it sure. But as far as I know, that's my understanding. So yes, you're right. At the moment, that's a really vegetated neck of the woods, literally. So yes, and then it bumps into the Ship Inn. But then, but that wooded site, the Ship Inn site, that's not part. It's not the same as the character parts that we identified in terms of that residual kind of meadow that rolls down and then rolls up. It hasn't got that contiguous, undeveloped.
I'm sorry, I'm not a local to Gloucester. I've only lived here 20-odd years. So the Ebley bypass, when did that arrive in terms of the IHCA?
I am a local, born and bred. So I can give you a few years on that. The bypass, as far as I can remember, was 1990s, 94, I think, stretching my brain back. Yeah, 94, I reckon. So it's obviously on the line of the Old Midland Railway for the most part, so it followed that for the most part. But yeah, 94-ish.
And when did the IHCA, when was that created?
86.
Right, any more questions? Or should we move on to whether somebody would like to propose officer advice is refusal? Would anybody like to propose refusal? John, you proposing refusal?
Yes, in fact, reading right through all the documentation, it seems one of the strongest things. The report, sorry.
First, otherwise this could be a bit
Sorry.
academic. We just see if you've got a seconder first, otherwise this could be academic.
I can't hear you. Would you say?
Anybody wish?
Yes, have I got a seconder?
Yes. Let's see. Anybody wish to second for refusal? If not, then we'll need to have an alternative motion. No, it doesn't look like you've got a seconder for that, John. So does anybody want to put a motion to permit? Yes, Hayden.
I have a slight concern on something this important that we, with greatest respect to Amy, I know she picked this up today and it's a bit much to expect her to be able to come up with all the detail. Some of the things that John probably might be able to answer, I'm not sure we've wholly got. You're the experts and I would just welcome your comments on that.
Chair, it's fair to say that it did certainly cross my mind to ask whether or not this item should be deferred from tonight's agenda, but I'm very mindful that the application has been in for a considerable length of time, and the next DCC meeting is not until the 7th of April, so there's quite a gap between now and then. But it is also true to say that obviously we were unaware that John was not going to be available until this morning, so we are in a difficult position because as case officer and with knowledge of the previous proposal, he could have been far more helpful to you as members determining the application than we've been able to do, although obviously we've done our best.
I'm in your hands. If somebody wishes to propose deferral, then
I'm just slightly conflicted because I'm minded to want to perhaps challenge the officer's recommendation, but I'm slightly concerned that I would do that without having the full knowledge of the application. Because there are some issues, some of which Kate and Amy have mentioned, and potential improvements I think that could be made, but I'm just slightly conflicted because I don't want to make a decision as important as this based upon slightly less than full information.
as I say, I'm in the committee's hands. If you feel that you'd like to propose deferral, we'll see if we've got a seconder for that. So whether the committee feel that they've had enough information to make a decision, or whether the committee feel that they would prefer to defer in the hope of having more information. It's really whether you feel you've had enough information to determine. I guess if you feel you haven't had enough information to determine, then you'll have to go for deferral. But I'm in your hands. Yes, Nigel.
Chairman, we seem to have come upon a bit of an impasse here. I mean, no one wants to propose refusal, so I will propose that we grant permission.
Does that have a seconder? Okay, Mark, we have a seconder, so that's the motion. Okay, we're now into debate. Does anybody want to debate that motion? Nigel.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, this is a difficult one. We've had a most extensive and passionate disposition from our senior conservation officer defending the IHCA. Admitted it's a small site, but nevertheless very, very important. It may well be, well, if it's against the local plan, I think that actually says so in the report. But I think sometimes it depends on the weight that you give to certain factors. Are there exceptional circumstances, and what are those various factors? The local council, the Stonehouse Council, is clearly in favour of it, and they've stated again quite clearly the benefits to the local population, the economy, and the environment. The local councillor, Councillor Curley, has also stated very clearly what the benefits of having this development go ahead are. The canal restoration will benefit the whole district, and this enhances the canal restoration, so therefore from that point of view it's a very good thing. And finally, it's a thriving local business which I think we should support. It's a success story. Nowadays auctions are largely, well, I'm guessing a bit here, but there's a tremendous amount of business transacted over the internet. Although maybe a lot of the items come locally, they are viewed by people all over the world. So this is a real success story for the district, and I think it's incumbent upon us to support it. And I get the impression that every effort has been made to mitigate the effect of this on the surrounding area, having it being lowered into the site. So that is the reason. They are the reasons why I think we should grant permission to this.
Councillor Reeves, do you wish to speak a second?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Just echoing all the sentiments we've just heard, I would normally give enormous weight to the local plan, neighbourhood plans if they exist, or Stroud District Plan. In this case, with the overwhelming support of the local community, the businesses, for a positive local business and the absence of any local objections, I think it's the right way to go to permit this development.
Jenny?
I felt quite conflicted about this report, because while I was giving due weight to the local plan, when I kept reading about a rural idyll, and having lived in this area all my life, that's not how I viewed it. It's quite an urban area, and I wrote to the officer to see what the height of the building would be and what the height of the trees would be, and the reply said that the trees would be about 10 to 15 metres and the building will be 8, so that seems to be quite adequate screening. I don't know if they were deciduous or no, but I felt the boost this will give to the economy and the jobs it will bring to not only Stonehouse but possibly along to Ebley Wharf and on to Stroud, I veered towards actually granting the application. So when I've listened to what everybody has to say and I've considered, I am veering that way.
John?
Shall I tell you something? I'm sad for those officers who worked so hard, who've got a good thing in. I mean, you're going to have laws or not laws. You know, I mean, with the local plan, other people will charge you when they get their nose in because you've done it. You make it such hard work for and I do really mean this. I'm really angry about it. You know, why did they step up their time? It's wasting their time.
Miranda?
Thank you. This is a really, really difficult one because we have the economy and the local people's feelings balanced against the industrial heritage. And I completely take your point about the industrial heritage. And it's about going along the canal and seeing what, you know, the historical aspect from the canal rather than from the road. And I can see that. But then history is a process of evolution, isn't it? And this is how things change. And if the site can be developed in such a way as not to intrude upon the view from the canal, and you're probably hating me for saying this, sufficient screening, and there is a gap. I'm not entirely happy with the amount of car parking, but it is a massive building, it is a big building, but it seems to me that yes, there's a national policy to be taken into consideration, but there are also the arguments about the local business, the local economy, and balancing the two, and if a lot of effort has been put into making the site acceptable, and I think a lot will be dependent on what happens to the neighbouring site. We can't consider that now, but you know how the neighbouring site is also developed to try and retain as much as possible as that greenness and the peace and serenity. I can see what you're describing going up the canal. Hopefully that can be preserved. So I think on balance I should be voting for this to go ahead.
Yes, Hayden.
We're judging this application, not potential future ones, and I think this is a little bit different in its location with regard to the Ebley bypass there. To me, it does seem that it's tucked in underneath it. I do hope that some design work could be done on the building to make sure perhaps it evolves from an agricultural form to something that might be more in keeping. I've got slight concerns about the car parking, that I think some of these modern treatments whereby you have grass as opposed to type 1 or tarmac or anything like that, that could be developed. But I certainly think, bearing in mind all the other comments that have made, I think some treatment to the boundary and sensitive development underneath the Ebley bypass there, and this is different to the rest of that field going along. We're constantly told we've got to judge applications that are before us, not anticipate what else might come. I feel slightly hypocritical because I've been here defending the IHCA resolutely time and time again, but I think I will be supporting permission on this case.
Sorry, Jerry wants to jump in.
Thank you, Chair. I think...
Does anybody else have any other questions?
Oh, sorry. Chair, through you, it sounds as if the consensus of opinion is probably to permit the application as per Councillor Cooper's motion. May I ask, because of obviously the application is before you recommended for refusal, while you've been speaking, I've been quickly going through the report, and whilst it contains some conditions that we would want to attach to a permission, it doesn't contain all the conditions, and Chris Mead has just reminded me that the Highway Authority would also wish to attach further conditions. So may I ask if the committee is minded to permit the application that we look at delegated permission to officers so that we can put together a comprehensive list of conditions appropriate for the development, which I'm happy, if you wish, to be agreed with the Chair and Vice Chair of the meeting before the decision notice is issued.
Nigel, would you be okay with that?
Yes, I think that's a very sensible suggestion. Obviously, there are conditions and everything you have to put in, and I get the impression that there, just from what we've heard this evening, that there is a lot of goodwill from the applicant, and I just hope that will be seen through. But certainly, I would agree with you on that. Thank you.
Okay, and I assume your seconder is okay with that. Right. Any more debate? In which case we're going to go to the vote. So, do you want to remind the committee exactly what they're voting on?
So, Chair, the vote would be to delegate authority to permit the application to officers in conjunction with the Chair and Vice Chair of committee to agree those conditions prior to the decision notice being issued.
Obviously be giving permission. So, I'll get it right this time. It's 2 for yes, 3 for no, 4 to abstain. And that is carried. Thank you very much.